This is also a time of change for my family. I count on the loving help of my darling wife, Camilla. In recognition of her own loyal public service since our marriage 17 years ago.
They say the most powerful decisions inside Buckingham Palace are never announced when they're made. They're discovered weeks later, hidden inside cancelled engagements, rewritten schedules, and doors that suddenly stop opening. That's exactly why royal insiders were stunned when whispers began spreading that Queen Camilla's final remaining royal responsibility had quietly disappeared. No dramatic announcement, no public confrontation, just one decision that reportedly came directly from King Charles himself. And what he is said to have revealed behind closed palace doors has left even seasoned royal watchers asking the same question. Why now? Because if those private conversations are to be believed, this wasn't simply about Camilla, it was about the future of the monarchy itself. The door closed without a sound, yet everyone inside the room seemed to feel the weight of it. King Charles remained seated at the head of the polished table, his eyes fixed on a single folder that none of the advisors dared to touch. The conversation had already lasted for hours, but no one spoke now. Every recommendation had been delivered, every concern had been recorded. All that remained was one final decision. According to palace whispers that would later spread through royal circles, the king quietly looked around the room before uttering a sentence that left even his closest aides frozen. If those accounts are to be believed, he simply said that the time had come to let the last roll go. Outside those walls, nothing appeared unusual. Palace guards carried on with their routines. Visitors admired the grandeur of the royal estate. Official engagements continued as planned. Yet behind the carefully managed image of stability, something remarkable was allegedly unfolding. Schedules were being revised without explanation. Invitations were quietly rewritten. Private secretaries were making discreet phone calls that never appeared on official records. Those who noticed the sudden changes reportedly understood one thing. A major shift inside the monarchy had already begun long before the public had any idea. Then came the rumor that refused to disappear. Palace insiders allegedly claimed the decision centered on Queen Camilla herself. Not a temporary adjustment, not a routine calendar change. This time, it involved what many believed to be the final significant responsibility attached to her public role. Even more surprising was the growing suggestion that King Charles himself had personally chosen to explain the reasoning behind it, instead of allowing endless speculation to take over. If that were true, it would mark one of the most extraordinary moments of transparency the modern monarchy had ever witnessed.
It's time for a Bower bombshell. Tom, you're hearing of some post-coronation tensions between Queen Camilla and the Princess of Wales, Kate?
Absolutely. What was very interesting was I heard from people who were very, very much involved 20-odd years ago, more than 20 years ago, in resurrecting Camilla.
Hi viewers, let me ask you something. If you believe no one inside the royal family should be treated as though they are above difficult decisions, even when those choices spark controversy, don't stay silent. Let your voice be heard. Like this video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments one simple thing. Do you believe King Charles made the right decision? Yes or no? Every like helps more people discover this discussion. Every comment adds another perspective. And every subscription helps us keep bringing you the royal stories the headlines often leave behind. What made this story impossible to ignore was not simply the alleged loss of a royal responsibility, it was the timing. For months, royal commentators had spoken of modernization, careful planning, and a future shaped by a leaner monarchy. Those discussions rarely attracted much attention because they sounded administrative rather than dramatic. But according to sources familiar with internal conversations, one confidential review gradually evolved into something much larger. It allegedly became a direct examination of who would carry symbolic authority in the years ahead, and who would quietly step back. No official statement explained why several long-standing arrangements had reportedly been revisited. Instead, small details began catching the attention of experienced royal correspondents. Certain appearances disappeared from upcoming schedules. Long-established planning meetings were allegedly cancelled without public explanation.
Their job was to take her from the mistress in 1996 and get her to be queen. And they were absolutely furious that they weren't invited to the coronation. There are dozens of people who helped Camilla become what she is today, the queen, and not just the mistress who is being pelted with brown rolls.
Senior household staff reportedly attended an unusual series of private consultations that stretched late into the evening. None of those events confirmed that a historic decision had been reached. Yet together they painted a picture that many observers found impossible to dismiss. The mystery deepened when whispers suggested that the review had never been about personalities alone. According to those familiar with the process, advisors had examined constitutional tradition, ceremonial responsibilities, financial efficiency, and the future direction of the crown. Every page of the confidential assessment reportedly asked the same difficult question: which responsibilities genuinely strengthened the institution, and which had gradually become symbolic remnants of an earlier era? If those reports were accurate, the conclusions would affect far more than a single member of the royal family. King Charles reportedly listened more than he spoke. Those said to have attended the discussions described a monarch who repeatedly requested additional evidence before accepting any recommendation. Rather than rushing toward a conclusion, he allegedly challenged advisors to justify every proposal. Some argued that continuity would reassure the public during a period of change. Others reportedly insisted that delaying difficult choices would only make future transitions more complicated. The debate was said to have remained respectful, but beneath the calm language lay enormous consequences. Meanwhile, Queen Camilla continued carrying out public duties with the composed confidence expected of a senior royal. To those watching from outside, nothing appeared different. Cameras captured familiar smiles. Official photographs reflected stability. Public engagements unfolded with polished precision. Yet, according to persistent palace speculation, very few people knew that decisions affecting her future responsibilities were already being discussed elsewhere. If those accounts are true, the contrast between the public image and the private uncertainty could hardly have been greater. The atmosphere inside royal circles reportedly shifted again after one confidential briefing landed on the king's desk. Its contents have never been officially released, and no verified record has entered the public domain. Even so, several royal commentators later suggested that the document combined months of internal reviews into a single recommendation. What that recommendation actually contained remains uncertain. What is clear is that the briefing became the moment many insiders point to when describing how routine discussions allegedly transformed into one of the most sensitive decisions of Charles's reign. Then something even more unexpected reportedly happened. Instead of quietly approving the recommendation, the king asked for one final series of consultations. That request surprised experienced palace officials, because many believed the outcome had already been decided. According to speculation circulating among royal observers, Charles wanted absolute certainty before allowing history to record such an important change. The delay only fueled more whispers behind palace walls, and each passing day seemed to raise the stakes. But none of those rumors prepared anyone for what would reportedly emerge next. Hidden within the confidential discussions was said to be a revelation so unexpected that even seasoned royal insiders questioned whether it could possibly be true. And if those claims were accurate, the explanation behind Camilla's reported final royal role had very little to do with what the public had been led to believe. A thick leather binder hit the mahogany table with a heavy thud that made the crystal glasses ring. The clock on the mantelpiece had just struck 2 in the morning, but nobody in the room was looking at the hour. A team of constitutional lawyers, private secretaries, and senior financial auditors sat in total silence as the lead investigator turned to page 47. The red ink across the top margin was still wet enough to smudge. For 6 agonizing hours, these advisors had been dissecting every single engagement, patronage, and ceremonial duty attached to the royal household. They were not reviewing routine calendars anymore. They were actively dismantling the operational architecture of the crown, and the atmosphere inside the room was thick with panic. Footsteps echoed down the long, dimly lit corridor outside as courier after courier arrived with encrypted folders. Every page contained data that had taken months to assemble in complete secrecy.
Camilla brought 20 Parker Bowleses to the coronation. There were 4 Middletons. All the people that helped Camilla get the crown on her head were excluded from that coronation, and they were furious. And not only that, Kate and William were angry too.
Financial projections going back a decade were spread across antique tables alongside public trust metrics and legal assessments from the highest constitutional authorities in the country. The instructions given to the review committee had been absolute. Leave no stone unturned. Question every precedent. Examine every position, regardless of who currently held it. As the hours dragged on, the audit uncovered a tangle of overlapping responsibilities that had quietly accumulated over generations. 2 separate offices were frequently managing identical ceremonial duties. Royal patronages were competing for the same public attention and private funding. Administrative costs had quietly inflated to support positions that existed purely out of tradition rather than modern necessity. The financial advisors pointed to hard numbers showing that maintaining the current structure was unsustainable for a streamlined monarchy. The legal experts pointed to constitutional precedents warning that blurred boundaries between senior royals could create dangerous institutional confusion during future successions. Yet, as the evidence mounted, an uncomfortable truth began to settle over the committee. This was no longer a cold administrative exercise. The data was pointing directly at the top of the royal hierarchy. Every calculation, every overlap, and every structural vulnerability kept tracing back to one specific office within the household. The investigators found themselves staring at a reality that none of them had been prepared to confront when the review first began. While the advisors worked through the night under harsh desk lamps, King Charles was reportedly receiving hourly updates in his private study. Those who observed him during this period described a monarch carrying an immense psychological burden. He was not merely a head of state reviewing organizational charts. He was a man forced to weigh institutional preservation against the deeply personal relationships that held his inner circle together. Senior aides argued that the survival of the modern monarchy depended on radical efficiency. They presented charts showing that the public expected a lean, focused, and transparent institution. To hesitate now, they warned, would be seen as a sign of weakness that critics would exploit for years to come. Outside the palace walls, the public remained entirely blind to the storm gathering inside. The official schedules printed in the morning papers looked completely unremarkable. Queen Camilla was scheduled for routine appearances, charity visits, and ceremonial gatherings in the weeks ahead. But behind the scenes, private secretaries were quietly flagging those exact dates on internal spreadsheets. Calls were placed to regional lieutenancies and event organizers with subtle, unexplained requests to delay press releases. Staff members who had worked for the household for decades began noticing that certain planning meetings were being cancelled without rescheduled dates. The quiet panic was spreading from the top officials down to the administrative assistants, even as everyone maintained a rigid professional composure in public. The friction within the palace circles was not marked by shouting matches or open arguments. It was far more dangerous than that. It manifested as icy silence in hallway passing, brief emails with carefully guarded language, and confidential meetings held behind locked doors without the usual record keepers present. Subtle factions began to form among the advisors. One group insisted that stability demanded tradition be preserved at all costs, warning that stripping away long-held ceremonial roles would trigger severe public pushback and internal resentment. The opposing group, made up of younger strategists and financial auditors, countered that maintaining outdated roles purely out of sentimentality was a luxury the modern crown could no longer afford. The legal team brought forward documents dating back over a century, demonstrating how previous monarchs had restructured their households during times of transition. But every historical example came with a warning. Every time a major ceremonial role had been removed or reassigned, it had left permanent scars within the family and created public relations disasters that took years to repair. The advisors knew they were playing with political dynamite. One wrong leak, One poorly timed announcement, or one misplaced word in the press, could transform a carefully calculated institutional adjustment into an uncontrolled scandal. Before we reveal the shocking contents of page 47 and the exact recommendation that left senior aides speechlessly staring at one another, let us speak plainly. Millions of viewers consume these deep historical breakdowns every single week, soaking up the quiet sacrifices and heavy decisions made behind closed doors, yet they walk away without taking 5 seconds to support the work required to bring these stories to light.
Yeah, I think stuff to do with family overwhelms me quite a bit. You know, worry or stress around family side of things, that does overwhelm me quite a bit. But in terms of, you know, doing the job and things like that, I don't feel too overwhelmed by that.
If you are sitting here absorbing this story, enjoying the depth and access we provide, but you still have not hit the subscribe button, you are choosing to be a passive observer while others build this community. Do not be the person who reaps the value and leaves nothing behind. Click the subscribe button right now, turn on notifications, and prove that you actually value the truth behind the history. As the clock crept toward dawn, the lead investigator gathered the final pages of the report into a single red folder. The room had grown cold, but no one moved to adjust the heating. The tension had reached a breaking point. The financial team had signed off on their figures. The legal counsel had attached their constitutional opinion. The private secretaries had finalized their risk assessments. Every avenue of retreat had been systematically closed by the evidence assembled over the past several months. The investigation had reached its inevitable, chilling conclusion. It was clear that the quiet modernization review was never intended to be a simple reshuffling of minor duties. It was a targeted, methodical dismantling designed to isolate one specific figure at the very center of the royal family. The advisors sat in the dim light of the early morning, staring at the cover of the finalized report, knowing that once this document reached the king's hands, there would be no turning back for anyone involved. The lead advisor slowly opened the binder one last time to read the final recommendation aloud to the room, ensuring that every word was recorded in the confidential minutes. The recommendation was stark, uncompromising, and completely unexpected. It did not propose a gradual transition or a shared compromise. It called for the immediate and complete removal of Queen Camilla's final remaining royal role, effective before the end of the year. A silver fountain pen hovered millimeters above the crisp parchment before King Charles slammed it down onto the mahogany desk, scattering handwritten notes across the floor. Across the private sitting room, Queen Camilla stood near the tall, curtained window, her shadow stretched thin under the dim lamplight. The air inside the room was so dense with unsaid words that even the veteran private secretary standing near the door barely dared to breathe. For 40 minutes, no staff member had been allowed to enter. The quiet confrontation between the king and his closest companion had reached a tipping point, turning what was supposed to be a routine evening review into an emotional battlefield. According to palace insiders who claimed to know the details of that late-night audience, Camilla refused to remain passive while her public legacy was dismantled piece by piece. She reportedly argued that stripping away her final primary role would send a devastating signal to the public. To the outside world, such a sudden subtraction would not look like administrative modernization. It would look like a quiet vote of no confidence from the monarch himself. She reportedly pointed to years of dedicated service, steady public appearances, and steady support during the most turbulent transitions of recent royal history. To remove this final ceremonial responsibility now, her supporters argued, was to invite endless public speculation and invite media attacks that could take years to contain. On the opposing side of the mahogany desk sat the cold recommendations of the king's senior strategists. The advisors insisted that sentimentality could no longer dictate institutional policy. Their reports argued that the survival of the modern monarchy depended entirely on creating a distinct, lean, and undeniably purposeful structure. Every single ceremonial responsibility had to justify its existence under intense public scrutiny. The strategists argued that maintaining overlapping duties between households created public confusion, inflated administrative expenses, and diluted the impact of royal patronages. In their view, If the king made exceptions for those closest to him, the entire premise of a modernized monarchy would collapse under charges of hypocrisy. King Charles found himself trapped directly between these two unforgiving forces. Those who observed him during those tense days described a leader carrying an exhausting psychological weight. He was torn between his constitutional obligation to protect the crown for future generations and his personal desire to preserve harmony within his immediate circle. The pressure was visible in every gesture, from the endless revisions requested on draft announcements to the sudden cancellation of internal briefings. The king reportedly refused to sign the official order, demanding rewritten drafts that attempted to soften the blow or reframe the restructuring in a gentler light. Yet every time the drafts were rewritten, the legal and financial teams returned with the same unyielding conclusion. Softening the language did not solve the operational overlap. Reframing the decision did not reduce the administrative costs. The core problem remained unchanged, forcing Charles to confront a reality he had spent months trying to avoid. Each delay only increased the risk of a catastrophic leak to the press, which would take control of the narrative before the palace could present its own carefully crafted explanation. As night turned to morning inside the ancient stone walls, the rift among senior palace staff deepened. Hushed conversations took place in quiet corridors and hidden alcoves far from official recording devices. One group of traditionalist aides warned that taking such drastic action against the Queen Consort would create lasting internal bitterness and weaken public perception of the royal partnership. They urged the king to delay any final ruling indefinitely, hoping the pressure for modernization would fade over time. Meanwhile, younger reformist advisors countered that delaying the decision would reveal hesitation at the top of the institution, leaving the monarchy vulnerable to critics who claimed the crown was incapable of genuine reform. While millions of people scroll past these detailed historical accounts every day without a second thought, a small group of viewers truly understands the deep weight of these private struggles. If you are sitting here absorbing this story, watching the hidden machinery of power unfold, and you still have not subscribed, ask yourself why you expect this content to continue existing without your support. Every single deep breakdown requires hours of investigation, careful drafting, and painstaking verification to deliver the truth behind palace walls. Walking away without subscribing means you are taking the value for granted while relying on others to sustain this channel. Stop being a passive bystander. Click the subscribe button right now, turn on notifications, and take ownership of the content you consume. Desperate to break the deadlock without causing an irreversible fracture within his household, King Charles took a step that caught his entire advisory team off guard. He ordered a complete halt to all immediate proceedings and requested a final, independent evaluation from an outside constitutional authority. This external arbiter was given strict instructions to review the entire case from scratch, completely separated from the political influence of internal palace factions. Word of this independent review spread quickly through the private offices of the senior royals. Among Camilla's supporters, a wave of relief settled over the household. Many believed that an objective outside observer would naturally recognize the value of continuity, tradition, and public stability. They convinced themselves that the independent review would recommend preserving her final role, effectively shutting down the aggressive modernization push championed by the younger strategists. For a brief moment, it appeared that the storm had passed and that the status quo would survive intact. During those few days of quiet waiting, the palace atmosphere seemed to stabilize. Public schedules were quietly resumed, official press releases were drafted according to normal protocols, and senior staff spoke with a guarded sense of optimism. The king appeared calmer, confident that he had found a balanced way to resolve the conflict without causing permanent damage to his personal or professional life. Everyone inside the inner circle prepared for the formal presentation of the independent findings, expecting a routine reaffirmation of Camilla's position. That fragile sense of security vanished in a single hour, deep into the night before the independent report was scheduled for formal delivery. An unmarked vehicle entered the palace grounds under light security. A single confidential courier, carrying a sealed leather portfolio, was escorted directly up the rear staircase toward the king's private quarters. No private secretaries were summoned, no legal counsel was notified. The meeting took place entirely behind closed doors, with only the king present. Inside that portfolio was a set of newly uncovered historical documents and financial records that had been completely overlooked during the initial months of internal auditing. Someone had quietly compiled an undeniable trail of evidence that recontextualized the entire operational history of Queen Camilla's final remaining role. The information contained within those pages did not merely suggest that the position was redundant. It revealed a deeply hidden institutional vulnerability that had remained obscured for decades. When King Charles finally emerged from his study in the early hours of the morning, his demeanor had completely changed. The hesitation that had defined his actions for weeks was gone, replaced by a cold, quiet resolve. Without offering a word of explanation to the waiting aides outside his door, he placed the newly delivered dossier on top of the original audit report. The fragile compromise that everyone had counted on was shattered, and the fate of Queen Camilla's final royal duty was sealed in a way that no one inside the palace had ever anticipated. The heavy gold fountain pen scraped against the thick parchment of the official warrant, leaving a dark trail of ink that permanently severed decades of royal precedent. King Charles did not pause to reread the final paragraph. He closed the red leather dispatch box, snapped the heavy brass latch shut, and handed the key directly to his principal private secretary. The clock on the wall had not yet reached 5 in the morning. Before the sun rose over the quiet palace gardens, the mandate was already moving through encrypted channels to the highest levels of the royal administration. Within 90 minutes of the signature, a small, highly vetted team of administrative officers began executing the operational handover. Hard drives containing years of event planning were secured and encrypted. Physical files detailing future patronages were quietly retrieved from Queen Camilla's private office and transferred to neutral household vaults. No public statements were issued to news organizations. No press releases were prepared for early morning distribution. The strategy was clear and brutal in its efficiency. The complete removal of her final royal role would be accomplished through silent bureaucratic erasure, long before the media even realized a shift had occurred. By mid-morning, subtle tremors began appearing on the public surface. Royal correspondents monitoring official digital calendars noticed strange adjustments. Prominent ceremonial appearances scheduled for the coming months were suddenly marked as subject to review. Other long-established patronages vanished entirely from the forward planning schedule without replacement dates or official explanations. At first, palace press officers claimed these were routine clerical updates caused by broader calendar maintenance. But experienced journalists knew the subtle language of palace communications. The complete absence of Queen Camilla's name from events she had hosted for over a decade was not a scheduling mistake. It was a clear signal that a major institutional shift was underway. Quiet inquiries began pouring into the press office from major international news networks. Journalists pressed for confirmation, asking if the Queen Consort was experiencing health issues or if a major disagreement had erupted behind palace walls. Household staff were under strict non-disclosure orders, instructed to offer vague, standardized replies that neither confirmed nor denied the growing speculation. The sudden wall of silence erected around the palace only fueled deeper curiosity across media newsrooms. Rumors began circulating that something catastrophic had transpired during the late-night consultations, forcing senior editors to assign dedicated investigative teams to track every movement coming in and out of the palace gates. While the media newsrooms scrambled for answers, senior aides inside the household were quietly summoned to an emergency briefing in the private library. The atmosphere in the room was heavy with suspense, as officials realized they were about to be briefed on a decision that would redefine the modern monarchy. Yet as we prepare to reveal the hidden explanations King Charles offered to his closest advisors behind those locked library doors, let us address something that happens far too often on this channel. Hundreds of thousands of people watch these detailed, deeply researched royal documentaries to the very end, soaking up every minute of psychological tension, yet they walk away without taking 3 simple seconds to subscribe. You sit here consuming the labor, enjoying the depth of the narrative, and then you scroll away, as if the effort required to produce this work costs nothing. If you genuinely value this level of detailed, cinematic storytelling, leaving without subscribing shows a total disregard for the work put into bringing these hidden stories to light. Click the subscribe button right now, turn on notifications, and take responsibility for supporting the content you enjoy. Inside the private library, King Charles stood before the small gathering of senior household officials. He did not offer a formal speech, nor did he rely on prepared statements crafted by public relations advisors. Instead, according to palace insiders who claimed knowledge of the gathering, the king delivered a direct, deeply serious explanation that caught even his veteran advisors off guard. He laid out the months of confidential reviews, financial audits, and long-term succession projections that had driven his final decision. He explained that the removal of Queen Camilla's final remaining role was not an act of personal rejection, nor was it the result of a sudden internal argument. It was the culmination of a deliberate, cold calculation designed to protect the monarchy from structural paralysis. The king revealed that internal data had clearly demonstrated an unsustainable accumulation of ceremonial responsibilities across different royal households. Maintaining overlapping duties between the king and queen consort created administrative confusion, inflated public expenditure, and diluted the impact of royal engagements across the country. More importantly, Charles spoke candidly about the long-term future of the crown and the upcoming transition toward the reign of Prince William. The confidential review had concluded that allowing senior royals to hold overlapping ceremonial positions created dangerous constitutional precedents that would complicate future successions. If every senior royal retained legacy roles out of sentimentality, the institution would become bloated, expensive, and out of touch with a modern public demanding lean efficiency. The king explained that taking this drastic step now was a necessary burden he had to carry himself. By removing Queen Camilla's final role during his own reign, he was absorbing the immediate public backlash and media scrutiny, ensuring that future monarchs would inherit a streamlined, modernized framework free of administrative clutter. The decision was presented not as a defeat or a punishment, but as a calculated sacrifice required for the long-term survival of the institution. The officials in the room listened in absolute silence as the king laid out the strategic framework behind his mandate. The narrative was logical, disciplined, and constitutional. It painted a picture of a monarch making a difficult, selfless choice for the greater good of the crown. For many in the room, the explanation seemed complete, offering a rational end to weeks of bitter internal conflict and intense media speculation. Yet as the meeting concluded and advisors quietly filed out of the private library, several veteran aides carried a lingering sense of unease. The explanation had been thorough, but to those who had observed the king closely over many decades, something felt incomplete. According to persistent rumors circulating among palace insiders, King Charles had deliberately withheld one critical piece of information from his senior advisors during that private briefing. Behind the polished narrative of institutional modernization lay a deeper, far more sensitive detail that the king refused to put into words, a final secret that remained locked away inside his private files. The official letterhead bore the royal crest, but the document sitting on the desk was not an official decree. It was a single sheet of paper containing a list of names, dates, and encrypted file references that had been marked for total destruction. In the quiet courtyard below the king's private apartments, an unmarked administrative vehicle was idling, waiting to carry sealed metal boxes to the secure state archives outside London. Queen Camilla stood by the glass, holding her composure with practiced elegance, as the last tangible symbols of her final royal role were loaded into the trunk. The public would see only a regal, unwavering figure continuing her public duty without a trace of resentment. But behind her calm expression lay the quiet, painful reality of an era coming to a sudden, permanent close. Outside the palace gates, public reactions split cleanly down the middle as news of the operational changes began to settle. Television broadcasts carried heated debates between traditionalists who viewed the removal of her role as an unnecessary public humiliation, and modernizers who praised King Charles for taking decisive action to streamline the crown. Newspaper headlines analyzed every detail of her recent schedule, searching for hidden signals of distress or lingering tension within the royal marriage. Yet despite the relentless media coverage, official statements remained strictly disciplined, framing the entire shift as a forward-looking institutional evolution designed to serve the nation more effectively. Inside the household, the transition moved forward with clinical precision. Ceremonial responsibilities were quietly divided among existing departments. Patronages were realigned under broader institutional umbrellas, and staff members were discreetly reassigned to new roles. The narrative presented to the public was one of selfless sacrifice and modern efficiency, depicting a monarchy adapting to the realities of a changing world. It was a narrative designed to reassure the public, quiet the critics, and protect the monarchy from long-term damage during a delicate period of transition. Yet for all the polished explanations offered by palace press offices, those familiar with the internal workings of the royal household understood that the official story was only a partial truth. The decision had never been a sudden response to public pressure or a simple administrative cleanup. It was the final, deliberate step in a grand restructuring strategy that had been quietly set in motion years before the public ever suspected a change was coming. King Charles had acted not out of hostility or panic, but out of an uncompromising conviction that future monarchs needed a radically simplified, tightly focused institution to survive in the decades ahead. Before we reveal the final unreleased document that continues to haunt senior palace insiders, let us address something critical. Millions of people watch these complex historical breakdowns, absorbing the tension, the hidden motives, and the sacrifices made behind closed doors. Yet they close the screen without ever subscribing. You consume the labor, you enjoy the cinematic depth, and then you walk away, leaving others to carry the weight of supporting this channel. If you sit here taking this level of investigative storytelling for granted without hitting that subscribe button, you are actively undermining the very work you enjoy. Do not be the viewer who extracts value and offers nothing back. Click the subscribe button right now, turn on notifications, and stand by the effort it takes to bring these hidden truths to light. As the dust began to settle across the royal estates, a lingering question remained unanswered inside the narrow corridors of the palace. Insiders insist that one crucial document from the confidential review was deliberately omitted from the official archives, kept far away from public record keepers and government officials alike. According to sources close to the review committee, this classified folder contained personal notes handwritten by King Charles himself during the late-night sessions preceding his final decision. Those who claim to have seen the folder say it holds a far deeper, unsettling explanation for why Queen Camilla's final role had to be stripped away so completely. An explanation that connects directly to an undisclosed pact made behind closed doors during the late Queen's final months. Whether that hidden document will ever see the light of day remains one of the most closely guarded secrets of the modern reign. What is certain is that the restructuring marked the end of an era, forever altering the internal dynamics of the royal family and setting a precedent that will shape the monarchy for generations to come. But the story does not end within the quiet walls of London. In our very next documentary, we pull back the curtain on the secret emergency meeting summoned by Prince William just 48 hours after Charles signed the final decree. You will discover the exact 7-word warning William delivered to senior aides regarding the future of the crown, a chilling mandate that proves the silent battle for the future of the royal family has only just begun. You cannot afford to miss a single second of what comes next. Subscribe now and make sure your notifications are turned on, because the next revelation changes everything you thought you knew about the future king.